Boys and girls, welcome back to part 2 of the 500 hats of Bartholomew Cubbins. We left off with the Grand Duke, who was also a child, saying that he could get the hat off Bartholomew's head. "Pooh," said the Grand Duke Wilfrid, looking at Bartholomew's hat and laughing meanly. "That hat won't come off. You stand over there." He pointed to a corner where the wall curved out. "I need a little target practice with my bow and arrow." When Bartholomew saw the Grand Duke Wilfrid had only a child's bow, he didn't feel frightened. He spoke up proudly. "I can shoot with my father's big bow." "My bow's plenty big enough for shooting hats, especially hats like yours," answered Wilfrid. And he let fly an arrow. Zzz! It grazed Bartholomew's forehead and nipped off his hat. Away it blew and over the parapet. But another hat appeared on his head. Zzz! Zzz, zzz, the arrows flew till the Grand Duke's whole bag full of arrows was gone. And still a hat sat on Bartholomew's head. "It's not fair!" cried the Grand Duke. "It's not fair!" He threw down his bow and stamped upon it. 154 hats, gulped Sir Arlick. "These hats are driving me mad!" The king's voice rang out through all the palace. "Why waste time with a child's bow and arrow? Fetch me the mightiest bow and arrow in all my realm. Fetch the yeoman of the bowmen." "Yeoman of the bowmen!" echoed all the lords and noblemen of the court. A gigantic man strode across the terrace. His bow was as big as the branch of a tree. The arrow was twice as long as Bartholomew and thicker than his wrist. "Yeoman of the bowmen," said the king, "shoot off this boy's head and make it stay off." Bartholomew was trembling so hard that he could scarcely stand straight. The yeoman bent back his mighty bow. Grrr-zimb! Like a mad giant hornet, the arrow tore through the air towards Bartholomew Cubbins. Grrr-zap! The arrow head bit through his hat and carried it off. On and on for a full half-mile. Grrr-zap! It plumped to a stop in the heart of an oak tree. Yet, there on Bartholomew's head sat another hat. The face of the yeoman of the bowmen went white as the palace walls. "It's black magic!" he shrieked. "Black magic! That's just what it is!" sighed the king with relief. "I should have thought of that before. That makes things simple. Back to the throne room! Call my magicians!" In the whole throne room there wasn't a sound as loud as a breath. But from the spiral stairs that led down from the southwest tower came the shuffling of low, padded feet. The magicians were coming. Low and slow they were chanting words that were strange. "Dig a hole 5 furlongs deep, down to where the night snakes creep. Mix and mold the magic mud, Malber, Talber, Titter, Tud." In came 7 black-gowned magicians, and beside each one stalked a lean black cat. They circled around Bartholomew Cubbins, muttering deep and mysterious sounds. "Stop this useless muttering," ordered the king. "I want a chant that will charm away this boy's hat." The magicians huddled over Bartholomew and charmed. "Winkabus, tinkabus, votichi-clay, hat on this demon's head, fly far away. Howl, men, howl away, howl away, howl away. Yowl, cats, yowl away, yowl away, yowl away. Hat on this demon's head, seep away, creep away, leap away, gleep away, never come back." "A mighty good chant," said the king, looking very pleased. "Are you sure it will work?" All the magicians nodded together. "But," said the king, looking puzzled, "there still seems to be a hat upon his head. How long will it take for the charm to work?" "Be calm, O sire, and have no fears," chanted the magician. "Our charm will work in 10 short years." "10 years!" gasped the king. "Away, fools!" he shouted. "Out of my sight! I can't wait 10 years to get rid of his hat. Oh dear, what can I do? What can I do?" "If I were king," whispered the Grand Duke Wilfrid, "I'd chop off his head." "A dreadful thought," said the king, biting his lip, "but I'm afraid I'll have to." "Young man," he said to Bartholomew Cubbins, and he pointed to a small door at the end of the room. "March down those steps to the dungeon and tell the executioner to chop off your head." Bartholomew's heart sank into his boots, but he did as the king commanded. "I must take off my hat," he said to himself as he started down the long black stairway. "This is my last chance." One hat after another tore from his head. 156, 157, 158. It grew colder and damper. 217, 218, 219. Down, down, down. 231, 232, 233. It seemed to Bartholomew he must be in the very heart of the mountain. "Who's there?" said a voice from the blackness. Bartholomew turned a corner and stepped into the dungeon. The executioner was whistling and swinging his axe idly, because at the moment he had nothing to do. In spite of his business, he really seemed to be a very pleasant man. "The king says you must chop off my head," said Bartholomew. "Oh, I'd hate to," said the executioner, looking at him with a friendly smile. "You seem like such a nice boy." "Well, the king says you have to," said Bartholomew, "so please get it over with." "All right," sighed the executioner, "but first you've got to take off your hat." "Why?" asked Bartholomew. "I don't know," said the executioner, "but it's one of the rules. I can't execute anyone with his hat on." "All right," said Bartholomew, "you take it off for me." The executioner leaned across the chopping block and flipped off Bartholomew's hat. "What's this?" he gasped, blinking through the holes in his mask, as another hat sat on Bartholomew's head. He flipped this one off, then another, and another. "Fiddlesticks!" grunted the executioner, throwing his axe on the floor. "I can't execute you at all." And he shook hands with Bartholomew and sent him back upstairs to the king. The king had been taking a nap on the throne. "What are you doing back here?" he said to Bartholomew, angry at being awakened. "I'm sorry, your majesty," explained Bartholomew. My head can't come off with my hat on. It's against the rules." "So it can't," said the king, leaning back wearily. "Now, how many hats does that make altogether?" "The executioner knocked off 13, and I left 178 more on the dungeon steps," answered Bartholomew. 346 hats, mumbled Sir Arlick from behind a scroll. "Uncle Derwin," yawned the Grand Duke Wilfred, "I suppose I'll have to do away with him. Send him up to the highest turret, and I in person will push him off." "Wilfred, I'm surprised at you," said the king, "but I guess it's a good idea." So the king and the Grand Duke led Bartholomew Cubbins toward the highest turret. Up and up and up the turret stairs he climbed behind them. "This is my very last chance," thought Bartholomew. He snatched off his hat. 347! He snatched off another. He pulled and he tore and he flung them behind him. 398, 399. His arms ached from pulling off hats, but still the hats came. Bartholomew climbed on. 448, 449, 450, counted Sir Arlick, puffing up the stairs behind him. Suddenly, Sir Arlick stopped. He looked. He took off his triangular spectacles and wiped them on his sleeve. And then he looked again. The hats began to change. Hat 451 had not one, but 2 feathers. Hat 452 had 3. And 453 had 3 and a little red jewel. Each new hat was fancier than the hat just before. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" cried out Sir Arlick. But the king and the Grand Duke were way up where they couldn't hear. They had already reached the top of the highest turret. Bartholomew was following behind them. "Step right out here and get out on the wall," snapped the Grand Duke Wilfred. "I can't wait to push you off." But when Bartholomew stepped up on the wall, They gasped in amazement. He was wearing the most beautiful hat that had ever been seen in the kingdom of Did. It had a ruby larger than any the king himself had ever owned. It had ostrich plumes and cockatoo plumes and mockingbird plumes and paradise plumes. Besides such a hat, even the king's crown seemed like nothing. The Grand Duke Wilfrid took a quick step forward. Bartholomew thought his end had come at last. "Wait!" shouted the king. He could not take his eyes off the magnificent hat. "I won't wait," said the Grand Duke back to the king. "I'm going to push him off now. That new big hat makes me madder than ever." And he flung out his arms to push Bartholomew off. But the king was quicker than Wilfrid. He grabbed him by the back of his fine lace collar. "This is to teach you," His Majesty said sternly, "that Grand Dukes never talk back to their king." And he turned the Grand Duke Wilfrid over his knee and spanked him soundly right on the seat of his royal silk pants. "And now," smiled the king, lifting Bartholomew down from the wall, "it would be nice if you'd sell me that wonderful hat." 499, 498, 499, broke in the tired voice of Sir Arlick, who had just arrived at the top of the steps. "And that," he pointed to the hat on Bartholomew's head, "makes exactly 500. 500! exclaimed the king. "Will you sell it for 500 pieces of gold?" "Anything for you, sire," answered Bartholomew. "You see, I've never sold one before." The king's hands trembled with joy as he reached for the hat. Slowly, slowly, Bartholomew felt the weight of the great hat lifting from his head. He held his breath. Then suddenly, he felt the cool evening breezes blow through his hair. His face broke into a happy smile. The head of Bartholomew Cubbins was bare. "Look, Your Majesty, look!" he shouted to the king. "No, you look at me," answered the king, and he put the great hat right over his crown. Arm in arm, the king and Bartholomew went down to the court counting room to count out the gold. Then the king sent Bartholomew home to his parents. No basket on his arm, no hat on his head, but with 500 pieces of gold in a bag. And the king commanded that the hat he had bought, and all the other hats too, be kept forever in a great crystal case by the side of his throne. But neither Bartholomew Cubbins, nor King Derwin himself, nor anyone else in the kingdom of Did, could ever explain how the strange thing had happened. They only could say it just happened to happen, and it was not very likely to happen again. And that's the end of Bartholomew Cubbins, of the 500 hats of Bartholomew Cubbins. I hope you enjoyed it, boys and girls.